There was a moment, just before dawn, when the sky hung heavy with a deep, expectant silence. A single figure stood in the middle of an open field, looking up at the vastness above, heart burdened with invisible questions. His hands, worn by years of striving, hung at his sides in surrender. He had built, he had fought, he had chased after dreams, and yet the fullness he longed for still eluded him. In that stillness, he whispered words only God could hear. Is there more? Is there truly a life where I no longer strive but simply receive? It is a feeling many know far too well. Striving day after day, seeking meaning in achievement, identity in success, or security in possessions. And yet, despite all the energy poured out, a deep and gnawing emptiness remains. We build our lives brick by brick, achievement by achievement, yet the sense of abundance we seek often slips through our fingers like sand. Many stand at the crossroads of ambition and exhaustion, wondering if the promises of the Bible, of abundance, of overflowing life, were meant for others, or if somehow they missed the way. Doubt creeps in, not always loudly, but with the subtlety of a slow sunrise. Maybe I'm not chosen, some whisper in their hearts. Maybe true abundance is for the strong, the perfect, the ones who somehow manage to get everything right. Questions swirl. Does God truly take over my life when I surrender? Is there a life where scarcity and striving are replaced by peace and provision? Or are these simply ancient promises, beautiful but distant from the messy reality we face today? For so many, the teachings of the Bible can feel like a map written in an unfamiliar language. They long to understand, to apply these truths to their daily lives, to their relationships, to their work, to the secret battles they fight behind closed doors. Yet confusion often holds them back. The voices around them offer conflicting interpretations, layers of human tradition clouding the pure, transformative truth that God offers through His Word. It's easy to feel lost, even while holding the Bible in hand. And yet, the truth remains. God has not changed. His promises have not grown stale with time. His plan for your life is not one of endless striving, but of divine takeover, a sacred surrender that ushers in a life of abundance without end. You are not forgotten. You are not too broken, too late, or too far gone. You are the chosen one, and the life God desires for you is closer than you realize. In today's message, we will uncover one of the most powerful teachings of Scripture, a revelation that will not only encourage your heart, but transform your vision of what it means to live as a child of God. You will learn how the abundance promised in the Bible is not a myth nor a distant reward, but a present reality for those who trust in the one who gives without measure. This isn't about theoretical knowledge. It's about real life, daily walking in the overflow of God's goodness and grace. So, if you desire to go deeper, if your heart aches for the kind of life that is anchored in unshakable truth and heavenly provision, you are in the right place. Stay with us. Together, we will explore what it means for God to truly take over, and how that changes everything. Before we dive in, I invite you to take a step of faith with us. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, and activate the notification bell, not just as a formality, but as a declaration that you are committing to grow, to learn, and to walk more closely with the Lord. Every like, every subscription is a seed sown into a movement of people hungry for truth and transformation. Also, share with us in the comments. Write the phrase, "I choose to live in God's abundance." Let it be more than just words. Let it be your declaration of faith today. And let's grow together as a community of believers, determined to live by the powerful teachings of the Word. What you are about to discover might seem familiar at first, but stay until the end, because you are about to see it through a new lens, a lens of wisdom, depth, and divine revelation. You will not leave this message the same way you came. God has something personal, powerful, and perfectly timed for you. Teaching 1. John chapter 15, verse 16. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. and so that whatever you ask in my name the Father will give you." There is a sense of holy urgency wrapped in these words, a call that reaches beyond time and culture, speaking directly to the restless heart that longs to know its place in the world. These are not the words of a distant deity. They are the tender yet powerful declaration of a God who has intentionally chosen you. Not by accident, not as a second option. You were seen, you were appointed, you were called to a life of eternal impact. As we step into this verse today, it is crucial to understand this is not a forgotten sentence buried in an ancient book. It is a living, breathing truth, a compass for anyone who ever wondered, am I truly called for something more? When Jesus spoke these words, he was preparing his disciples for the life that would follow his departure. They would face opposition, confusion, trials that would test the very core of their faith. He knew their hearts might be tempted to doubt their worth, to question their mission. And so he anchored their identity, not in their own ability to choose him, but in the unshakable reality that he had already chosen them. Think about the power of that truth. In a world where people constantly strive for validation, for a sense of belonging, Jesus cuts through the noise and says, "You are already mine. You were chosen with a purpose that cannot be erased." This moment was not about passive belief. It was about an active calling to go, to bear fruit, to live a life so deeply rooted in him that the results would echo into eternity. Abundance without end begins here, in knowing that the source of our purpose is not our own striving, but his sovereign choice. But how does this ancient promise meet us today? In the middle of our messy, complicated lives, it speaks to every moment we doubt ourselves, every time we wonder if our prayers are reaching heaven, every season where it feels easier to drift into passivity than to press into purpose. Jesus reminds us, you are appointed to bear fruit that lasts, not temporary achievements, not fleeting applause, but eternal impact. And yet, the path is not always straightforward. Questions arise in the quiet spaces of our hearts. What if I am misinterpreting what God is trying to teach me? Why does it seem like I pray and nothing happens? Am I missing vital lessons because I am living on autopilot? What is this verse revealing about my true spiritual responsibility? These are not questions to fear. They are invitations, invitations to deeper trust, invitations to a life that listens more closely, obeys more quickly, and surrenders more completely. Because chosen ones are not perfect ones. They are simply those who keep showing up with open hands and open hearts, allowing God to take over the steering wheel of their lives. They are the ones who, even in the waiting, even in the silence, believe that the seed planted by God's choosing will one day bear fruit beyond what they can now imagine. So wherever you are watching from today, I want to invite you to be part of this movement. Share with us in the comments. Tell us which city or country you are watching from. Let's witness together how God's word is reaching hearts in every corner of the world. As we close this first teaching, I encourage you to hold this truth tightly. You are not an accident. You are not invisible. You are chosen by God himself for a purpose that will ripple into eternity. And this is just the beginning. The next teaching will unveil a truth often overlooked, yet it has the power to completely transform the way you live your faith. Stay with us, because what comes next could be the key to unlocking a deeper, richer walk with God than you ever thought possible. Teaching 2. Isaiah chapter 30 verse 18, "Yet the Lord longs to be gracious to you. Therefore he will rise up to show you compassion. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all who wait for him." There are moments in life when everything seems suspended, as if time itself has stopped breathing. You pray, you hope, you listen, but all that meets your longing is silence. Not an angry silence, not a void of abandonment, but a deep, sacred quiet, like the pause before a symphony's crescendo. Inside, questions rise gently, not with anger, but with aching honesty. God, are you still there? Did you hear me? Am I waiting for something that will never come? These are not moments of rebellion. They are moments of deep searching, when the spirit leans closer to the unseen and the soul strains to hear even the faintest whisper from heaven. It feels as if nothing is happening. Days, weeks, months pass. Prayers seem unanswered. Dreams seem delayed. And yet, something inside refuses to let go. A quiet ember of faith still burns, almost invisible, but alive. It is in these hidden seasons that Isaiah's words come alive with a beauty so profound, so tender, that they feel like water for a soul walking through a desert. The Lord longs to be gracious to you. He rises up, not against you, but for you, to show you compassion. His justice is not swift to punish, but patient to love. And blessed, yes, blessed, are those who choose to wait for him. This verse was spoken to a people who had lost their way, who had tried to solve their problems with their own hands, seeking alliances with nations rather than trusting the Lord. And yet, even then, God was not eager to condemn. His heart longed to restore, to bless, to pour out mercy. He was waiting patiently for them to turn back, not because he needed their worship, but because he knew that true life could only be found in him. And so it is with us. In the seasons where God feels silent, he is not absent. In the times when prayers seem to fall into an endless sky, they are heard, gathered, treasured. The waiting is not punishment, it is preparation. God is not idle. He is working in ways we cannot yet see, cultivating roots of faith that will one day sustain the weight of the blessings he longs to pour into our lives. Maybe you have been waiting for a breakthrough in your family, your health, your calling. Maybe you have prayed prayers that seem to hang unanswered, like stars in a night sky. And maybe, just maybe, the silence has started to whisper lies. God has forgotten you. You are alone. But listen closely. Beneath the stillness, a deeper work is being done. Your faith is stretching, your trust is deepening, your heart is learning to recognize God's presence not only in the miracles, but also in the mystery. Real spiritual maturity does not come from getting everything we ask for immediately. It is forged in the fires of waiting, in the silent seasons where we learn that God is enough, even when we do not yet see his hand moving. Think about it. How many times have we mistaken delay for denial? How often have we assumed that a quiet season meant a closed heaven? And yet, looking back, we often realize that the greatest changes in us were happening not when everything was happening quickly, but when nothing seemed to happen at all. It is in these seasons that God teaches us to walk by faith, not by sight. To believe, not because of what we feel, but because of who he is. So as you listen to this message today, take a moment to breathe deeply, to embrace the truth that even when the answer delays, even when the road stretches longer than you imagined, you are not forgotten, you are not abandoned, you are blessed, because you are waiting on a God who never fails. And if this speaks to your heart today, I invite you to declare it boldly. Write in the comments, "Even in silence, God is with me." Your words may become a light for someone else who is walking a similar road, searching for a sign that they are not alone. We are all travelers in this journey of faith, sometimes walking under the sun, sometimes under a clouded sky, but always under the watchful, loving gaze of our Father. And this, beloved one, is just the beginning. In the next part of our journey, we will uncover a hidden truth, one that many overlook. A truth that can anchor your heart and open your eyes to the unseen blessings God is already preparing for you. Stay close, because the story he is writing in your life is far from over. Teaching 3, James chapter 1, verse 22. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. You say you have faith, but are you still repeating the same patterns day after day, year after year? How many times have you prayed for guidance, only to ignore the answer because it demanded real change? Could it be that your comfort zone has quietly become a spiritual prison, disguised as a routine you call faith? These are not accusations meant to shame you. They are mirrors, honest reflections held up by the Word of God itself. Because the truth is, many claim to believe, many listen, many nod their heads during sermons or Bible studies, but listening alone does not transform a life. It is in the doing, the costly, inconvenient, often uncomfortable doing, that true faith is revealed. James, the brother of Jesus, knew this tension well. His letter was not written to people who hated God, but to believers, people who had already heard the truth. Yet he saw the danger lurking in their lives, hearing the word, but not living it out. Knowing what God asked, but delaying, excusing, pretending, and he calls it what it is, self-deception, not ignorance, not lack of opportunity, deception. A dangerous lullaby we sing to ourselves. I'm fine because I know what is right, even while our lives resist real obedience. Think about it. How many times have you felt the gentle tug of the Spirit nudging you to forgive, and you postponed it? How many times have you been convicted to step out in faith, but fear kept you frozen? How often have you blamed waiting on God's timing when deep down you were simply avoiding the cost of change? We cannot afford to sugarcoat this truth. Listening is not enough. Knowing Scripture by heart is not enough. Agreement without action is a hollow shell. True faith walks, true faith risks. True faith obeys, even when it is hard, even when it costs comfort, even when it demands we leave behind patterns that have defined us for years. So let me ask you directly, what has God already made clear to you, and you still have not acted? What excuses have you built to protect your comfort instead of pursuing your calling? The cost of staying where you are is not neutral. It quietly robs you of the abundant life God has prepared. It numbs your spirit. It dims your fire. But the moment you choose to act, to step forward even trembling, heaven leans in. Strength you didn't know you had begins to rise. Chains you thought unbreakable begin to fall. This word is not here to condemn you. It is here to awaken you. Today can be the day you choose obedience over convenience. Today can be the day you decide that faith must look like something real in your life. If this word stirred your heart, do not keep it to yourself. Share this message with someone you love, someone who, like you, needs to break free from spiritual cycles that no longer serve their destiny. Sometimes, a single shared truth can spark a revolution in a life. And if you are ready to commit to this new season of growth, write it boldly in the comments. Today I choose to grow with God. Declare it not only for others to see, but for your own heart to hear. Let today mark a new beginning, a day when faith moves from theory to action. And this is not the end. In the next part of this journey, we will uncover a truth hidden in plain sight, a truth that could shift your entire perspective on what it really means to walk with God daily. Stay close. The deeper you go, the freer you become. Teaching 4, Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. There are moments when life quiets, not because everything is resolved, but because we simply no longer have the strength to fight. In the soft stillness of a tired heart, even the noise of the world begins to fade. There, between breaths heavy with longing and minds restless with unanswered questions, something sacred stirs, the soul's silent cry for rest. Perhaps you remember a moment like that. A morning when you sat by the window, coffee cooling in your hands, and for the first time in a long time, you allowed yourself to feel how truly tired you were. Or maybe it was late at night, when the world slept and you lay awake, not restless, just empty, staring into the darkness, quietly hoping for a whisper of peace. Not for solutions, not for explanations, just peace. It is into that kind of silence that Jesus speaks today. Come to me, he says. Not come when you're strong, not come when you have answers, not come when you feel worthy. Simply come, all you who are weary, all who are burdened. He does not call the successful, the sorted, the shining. He calls the tired, the burdened, the broken. When Jesus first spoke these words, he was surrounded by people crushed under the weight of religious demands, societal pressures, and personal failures. He saw beyond their appearances, straight into the exhaustion they carried, but rarely voiced, and he still sees us today. He knows the invisible loads we drag behind smiles. He knows the quiet anxiety we tuck behind busy schedules. He knows the weariness that sleep doesn't fix, and he offers something the world cannot: real, soul-deep rest. Not temporary escape, not shallow comfort, but a lasting, breathing, living rest. A place in his heart where striving ends and belovedness begins. Maybe today you are carrying silent griefs no one else sees. Maybe you live with a constant low hum of anxiety you cannot explain. Maybe you smile out of habit, while inside your mind is a storm of self-doubt and unfinished prayers. Jesus' invitation is for you. His rest is not about solving every problem immediately. It's about exchanging the heavy yoke of doing it all alone for the light, steady yoke of walking side by side with him. It's about finding a refuge in his presence where your soul is seen, loved, and gently restored. Silence may fill the outer world, but inside his embrace there is a song, the quiet, steady rhythm of a love that does not demand, but simply receives. You don't have to hide your weariness. You don't have to pretend you're strong. You are invited to come exactly as you are and find not judgment, but rest. If this message has brought even a small breath of peace to your heart today, I want to invite you to walk this journey with us. Click on Join and become part of a community where faith is not just taught, but lived, where hearts find a safe place to heal, to grow, and to hope again. Here, you are not alone. Here, you are family. And as we move forward, I leave you with this gentle thought. Sometimes God's silence is not absence, it is his presence in its most profound form. In the next teaching, we will explore how to hear the heartbeat of God in the silence, and what those quiet seasons reveal about his tender heart for you. Stay close. The journey is just beginning, and even now, unseen, your soul is being cradled in the arms of grace. Teaching 5, Romans chapter 8, verse 25. The silent strength of those who wait on God. But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. There are seasons in life that feel like wandering through a silent desert. The ground beneath your feet is cracked and dry. The horizon stretches endlessly, a trembling line between sky and earth, promising nothing, offering no clear sign. Each step feels heavier than the last, not because the path is rough, but because the soul itself carries a weight unseen by any other eyes. It is in these long, hidden seasons that the truest battles are fought, not against visible enemies, not against storms that crash loudly, but against the slow erosion of hope within a waiting heart. Your hands have planted seeds that seem to lie dormant. Your prayers, offered with trembling faith, rise like incense into a sky that remains stubbornly silent. Your heart continues to beat with the fragile rhythm of a love that refuses to let go, even when no answers come. And the world moves on around you fast and glittering, while your soul lingers in a sacred, stubborn waiting. This is not the waiting of passive resignation. This is the waiting of fierce, invisible courage. The kind of faith that roots itself deep into dry ground, trusting that somewhere below the surface, life is still at work. The kind of hope that clings to the promises of God when circumstances offer no evidence at all. Romans 8:25 was written for souls like yours. Paul, writing to a young church in the heart of a brutal empire, knew what it meant to wait through suffering. He knew what it meant to hope for what was not yet seen. His words are not the poetry of idealism. They are the battle cry of those who have chosen to believe God even when every visible sign points to the contrary. But if we hope for what we do not yet have, we wait for it patiently. Patiently, not passively, patiently, not because the pain is small, but because the promise is greater. patiently, because faith is not a transaction to be rushed. It is a seed that must be tended with tears, trust, and time. You are not forgotten in the waiting. You are not invisible. Every unseen act of faith, every whispered prayer in the dark, every step you take when you feel like standing still, it is seen, it is counted, it is precious to the heart of God. Maybe you are like the mother who has prayed for years for her child's heart to return to God, and still she sees no change. Maybe you are the worker who shows up every day, giving their best, knowing their efforts go unnoticed by human eyes. Maybe you are the soul who continues to love God, even though your prayers seem met only by the silence of the stars. And yet, you are here, still standing, still believing. Like roots pushing deeper into unseen soil, your faith is not dying. It is strengthening. Like a flame flickering against the wind, your love is not being extinguished. It is being refined. Sometimes, the greatest victories are not the ones that shake the world outside, but the ones that quietly, stubbornly change the world inside. Waiting in God's kingdom is never wasted. Waiting is the sacred ground where perseverance is born. It is the hidden altar where worship is offered without applause, where surrender is tested without sight, where true trust is proven without immediate reward. It is where the soul learns to say, I will still believe, I will still hope, I will still love. Even here, even now, even in the silence, can you feel it? The quiet strengthening of your spirit? The way the ground beneath your waiting feet has not given way, but instead is becoming holy. You are walking a sacred road. The road of those who hope for what they do not yet have. The road of those who refuse to let go, not because it is easy, but because they have seen, with the eyes of the Spirit, a glimpse of what God has promised. And He who promised is faithful. Let today be a moment where you simply pause, breathe, feel the sacredness of where you are. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are exactly where the gardener is tending you, unseen but surely. If your heart resonates with this truth, if somewhere inside you the small flickering light of hope still burns, even if only barely, I invite you to take a step of faith. Write the word present in the comments, as a prayer, as a declaration, not perfect, not finished, simply present, here, alive, still believing. Or if you feel led, share a verse that has carried you through the silent seasons. Your testimony might be the whisper of hope that another weary soul needs to hear, or simply leave a heart. No words needed, just a silent, visible act of faith. You are not alone in this desert, and the desert is not the end. The seeds planted in silence will one day break through the surface. The tears sown in private will reap a harvest of joy. Stay steady, beloved one. Stay rooted, stay expectant, because even when you see nothing, heaven is moving. Even when you feel forgotten, your name is written on the hands of the one who never forgets. And sometimes, just before the dawn, the night feels the longest. But the promise stands. Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They will rise. They will walk. They will not faint. Hold on. The story God is writing in your life is still unfolding, and the best pages are yet to come. Teaching 6, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6. For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," made His light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of God's glory displayed in the face of Christ. There are truths that don't hurt us, but they keep us blind. It is entirely possible to sit in a church every week, to speak the right words, to know the right verses, and yet still walk in a heavy darkness inside. Not the darkness of rebellion, but the darkness of unawareness. The darkness of believing you are living fully in the light, when in fact parts of your heart are still veiled, still clinging to old fears, old lies, old wounds. It's like standing in a room with the lights on, but wearing a blindfold, you forgot you tied yourself. There are moments in the journey of faith where God, in His mercy, reaches out and pulls away the veil, not to shame us, not to condemn us, but to awaken us. 2 Corinthians 4:6 is not just a beautiful verse. It is a divine declaration of what God does in the soul that surrenders to true light. The same God who, at the beginning of time, spoke into the black void and commanded, "Let there be light," has spoken into the silent caverns of your spirit. His light shines not on you, but in you. Not borrowed light, not reflected light. His own light, the glory of his Son, illuminating every hidden place you thought you had to keep locked away. And yet, how often do we resist this unveiling? How many times have we mistaken comfort for clarity? How often have we settled for surface-level faith, avoiding the deeper work because it feels too raw, too uncertain? Maybe you've felt it. You pray, but there's a hollow echo. You believe, but your steps feel directionless. You listen for God's voice, but all you hear are the old fears whispering louder than ever. Sometimes it's not that God is silent, it's that we have not yet removed the layers clouding our spiritual ears and eyes. It's possible to have enough light to see the next step, but still be living half-blind to the greater vision God has for your life. This word today is an invitation to stop settling for dimness, to stop living halfway awake. God's light, the pure light of the knowledge of His glory, is not meant to simply comfort you. It is meant to awaken you, to burn away the fog, to reveal the paths you never dared to walk, to show you who you are in Christ, not who fear has told you to be. Think about it. What beliefs have you been carrying that keep your vision blurred? What fears have you called wisdom? What comfort zones have you called faithfulness? When in reality, they are prisons carefully decorated to look holy. What do you need to stop believing in order to start seeing with the true eyes of faith? God's revelation is not a spotlight of shame. It is a sunrise for the soul. It exposes what is broken, not to condemn, but to heal. It reveals what is missing, not to accuse, but to restore. It uncovers hidden wounds, not to embarrass you, but to pour oil and wine upon them. Today, if something inside you is stirring, if you feel a gentle shaking, a pulling at the veil, don't turn away. This could be your moment, the moment when light breaks through, the moment when knowledge is no longer just information, but transformation. The moment when you realize that you were never meant to stumble half-blind through your faith journey. You were meant to walk in full, glorious, spirit-led sight. And if this revelation spoke to you, if something inside you is awakening, I want to invite you. Take a step of faith right now. Subscribe to this channel, not for numbers, not for fame, but as a commitment to continue walking in greater light, to join a movement that believes faith must be living, breathing, and powerfully real. Together, we will shine discernment, hope, and truth into places still wrapped in shadows. And as a testimony of this awakening, I invite you to write in the comments, "I open my eyes to God's truth." Let that simple phrase be your declaration today, your way of tearing the old blindfold off and stepping fully into the light God is offering. Because awakening is not just for the strong, it's not just for the leaders or the loud. It's for the quiet heart ready to see, really see, for the first time. You are standing at the edge of a revelation, and in the next teaching we will go even deeper, to understand not just how to see, but how to live fully awake in a world desperate for true light. The journey is just beginning, and the next step could change everything. Teaching 7, 1 John chapter 3, verse 1. The love that calls you back home. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God, and that is what we are. Have you ever felt that no matter how hard you try, it's never enough? Have you carried a silent fear deep inside? The fear that maybe, just maybe, you're too small, too broken, too invisible to be truly seen, truly loved. There is a kind of tiredness that doesn't show on the face. It lives in the heart. It's the exhaustion of trying to prove your worth, of trying to earn a place, of wondering if you will ever feel truly at home, even among those who say they love you. And yet, the real problem was never who you are. The real ache comes from how easily we forget who we have always been. Somewhere along the way, the voices of the world grew louder than the whisper of the Father. Expectations piled up. Mistakes were written like labels across your heart. The feeling of displacement, of never quite fitting in, became almost normal. You began searching for yourself in places that could never hold the weight of your soul, in success, in approval, in perfection. But today, the Word of God comes not as a correction, but as a gentle remembering. See what great love the Father has lavished on us, that we should be called children of God. And that is what we are. Not someday, not if we achieve enough, not if we prove ourselves worthy. Now, already, eternally. This was not written for perfect people. It was spoken over hearts bruised by rejection, over lives weathered by silent battles, over souls that sometimes doubt whether they truly belong anywhere at all. You are called child not because of what you have done, but because of who He is. A Father who doesn't measure you by your failures. A Father whose love is not a contract you must keep, but a covenant sealed in His own heart. Imagine a name written on a will, forgotten by the heir. Imagine a child lost in a foreign land, whose soul still somehow knows the way home. That is you, that is all of us at some point, searching for what we already have, hungering for the embrace already open wide. You were never meant to live as an outsider in your own story. You were never meant to strive for what was always yours. Even now, even here, no matter how far you feel you have wandered, His voice calls you back. Not with anger, not with accusation, with a love so immense, so lavished, that it cannot be measured, only received. Maybe you've lived trying to earn a place in the Father's house. Maybe you've doubted if you could ever really belong. Maybe you've worn masks so long you forgot the feel of your own face. But you are not what the world labeled you. You are not the sum of your mistakes. You are not your fears, your insecurities, your losses. You are, and always have been, a beloved child of God. There is no striving here, only surrender. There is no earning here, only remembering. So if something deep inside you stirs at this truth, if a part of your heart feels seen, named, called, even as you read these words, don't ignore it. Let today be the day you stop running toward approval that was never needed. If this spoke to you, write it in the comments as a declaration of identity and faith. I am a beloved child of God. Not for others to see, but for your own heart to hear itself say once more the truth it was born knowing. You belong, you are loved, you are seen, you are already home. The battles you fought to prove yourself can end here. The striving to be enough can rest, because you were enough for Him to call you His. Before you ever did a thing, breathe in this truth. Let it settle deep in your soul. And know, this identity is not fragile. It is not temporary. It is not something that life's storms can steal. It is written in the very hands of the one who shaped you. And this is just the beginning. In the next teaching, we will talk about what happens when the world tries to erase the name God wrote over your life, and how to keep believing, even when everything around you tries to make you forget. Stay close, because the love that named you is the same love that will never ever let you go. Teaching 8, Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 3. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. It happens quietly, in the corners of days that seem ordinary. An email unanswered, a door that closes without warning, a dream you carried so close to your chest that you dared not even whisper it, fading silently under the weight of another unfulfilled season. You pray, you believe, you wait, and yet somewhere deep within the tension grows, like a string pulled too tight for too long. You feel it. That invisible pressure in your chest, the ache behind your smile, the slow burning question that you barely allow yourself to ask out loud. Why is nothing moving? It's as if your life is a stage set for a breakthrough, every piece in place, every prayer whispered, and yet the curtain refuses to rise. The sky is heavy, swollen with promises you can almost taste, and yet the rain doesn't fall. It feels like being trapped inside a moment that should have passed long ago, suspended, still, waiting for the unseen hand of God to finally move. And then, in the silence, in the heavy quiet of your spirit, a light flickers, a verse, a whisper, a promise not erased by time. For the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end and will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. This is not just poetry for the weary. It is a map for the soul lost in waiting. Habakkuk spoke these words at a time when the people of God were surrounded by injustice, confusion, and silence from heaven. It would have been easy to believe that God had forgotten, that his promises had crumbled under the weight of reality. But instead of abandoning hope, Habakkuk received a revelation, a message burning with eternal certainty. Wait, it will come. Even if your eyes grow tired, even if your heart grows heavy, trust what you cannot yet see. This verse does not minimize the pain of the wait. It dignifies it, it anchors it. It transforms the silence from an absence into an altar, a place where faith is purified, not punished. Maybe your waiting looks like endless prayers for a healing that has not yet come. Maybe it's a calling that feels further away today than the day you first heard it. Maybe it's a family restoration that seems impossible. Maybe it's simply the ache of wanting to feel alive again, spiritually, emotionally, deeply. Waiting is not the evidence of forgotten prayers. Waiting is the place where God prepares what eyes have not seen and hearts have not yet imagined. Roots grow in darkness long before they break through the soil. Lighthouses do not blink. They simply stand, steady, shining, even when no ship is yet on the horizon. And just because the sky is clouded does not mean the sun has moved. The light remains. It simply waits for the right moment to break through. Now, right here, at this very point in your journey, comes a holy invitation. A moment to refuse the lie that delay means denial. A moment to plant your feet on the unshakable promises of God, even when the ground beneath you feels uncertain. At the height of this moment, I want you to do something powerful. Wherever you are, whatever you are carrying, say it out loud. God is moving even when I don't see it. I choose to trust in the silence. My faith is alive in the invisible. Let your own voice break the cycle of fear. Let your own breath remind your heart that you are still standing, still believing, still waiting with sacred, stubborn hope. There is power when we speak faith over our silence. When we declare life even when we only see stillness. When we trust not because we understand, but because we know the one who holds the time and the seasons in his hands. And if this message touched your heart today, I encourage you to act not just for yourself, but for others still trapped in their silent storms. Think of someone who is also waiting for healing, waiting for hope, waiting for the promise to break through the clouds. Send them this message. Send it not just as encouragement, but as a prayer in motion. Sometimes the simplest gesture carries the presence of God into a heart that desperately needs it, because we are not alone in the waiting. We are never alone in the tension between the promise and its fulfillment. If this word spoke to you, if your spirit is stirred, leave a visible sign of faith in the comments, a simple act, a living echo of hope. Write, I am waiting in faith, not because you feel strong, not because the wait is easy, but because the promise is still alive, because God is still moving, even now, even here, even when everything inside you says otherwise. You are not forgotten. You are not stuck. You are being shaped, strengthened, anchored in a hope that will not disappoint. The sky may still look heavy, the winds may still whisper delay, but deep beneath the surface, life is growing. The appointed time is closer than you think. Stay steady, stay faithful, stay expectant. Because the silence of God is the language heaven uses when it is planting something too deep, too beautiful, too sacred for now. but destined to burst forth in time. And in the next teaching, we will explore how to trust God even when He doesn't explain. Because sometimes real faith doesn't need answers, it only needs presence. The story is not over. The sun is still there. The promise still speaks. And you are right where the miracle begins. Teaching 9, Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 to 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. There are moments that no preparation can shield us from. A letter arrives, a door closes, a voice on the other end of the line says the words you never imagined hearing. And just like that, the ground beneath your feet shifts. Everything you thought you knew, every plan, every certainty dissolves into air. There, in the weight of 1,000 unshed tears, you find yourself, kneeling without knowing what you are praying, looking without seeing, breathing because you must, not because you know where the next step will lead. You had dreams, you had timelines, you had prayers you thought were already answered, and yet the path in front of you is nothing like the map you carried so carefully. The hands that once reached eagerly for solutions now fall open, empty. The heart that once beat with expectation now beats slowly, with quiet surrender. Not giving up, but giving in. Not out of despair, but out of trust, too deep for words. This is the place where control ends and faith begins. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. These words are not a slogan for easy days. They are the anchor for the soul caught in the undertow of uncertainty. Solomon, in all his wisdom, knew there will be seasons when understanding will betray you, when logic will crumble, when the maps of men will offer no direction, and only the whisper of God will be enough. And in those moments, you are invited not to figure it out, but to fall into His hands, not to fight for clarity, but to surrender to presence. Maybe you are facing a decision today that feels impossible. Maybe you are standing in the ruins of a plan you loved. Maybe you are still asking heaven the questions that no longer even have the strength to form into words. And maybe the answer has already come, not in the form of explanations, but in the form of an open hand extended toward you in the silence. Trust, not because you understand, not because you see the full picture, but because the one holding you sees it all, and calls you to trust that His paths are straighter, higher, and truer than anything you could have written for yourself. It is not weakness to surrender. It is strength beyond reason. It is not failure to let go. It is the beginning of flight, like a boat with no sail, caught in the gentle, sovereign wind of God's Spirit. Like hands once clenched so tightly around a dream, finally opening and letting it fall safely into hands far more capable. Like a heart in free fall, not toward destruction, but toward a love too vast to comprehend. This is what it means to trust with all your heart. No backup plans, no escape routes, no holding a piece back, just in case. All, even when your heart trembles, even when your mind screams for answers, even when your eyes cannot see a single sign. Trust. Right now, wherever you are, I want to invite you into a holy moment of surrender. Or conmigo, Lord, I let go of everything I tried to control. Even without understanding, I trust you. Even without answers, I rest in you. Lead my heart through your silence. Amen. Breathe. Let that prayer be a breath that rises from the deepest part of you. Let it be more than words. Let it be your offering. And if this prayer echoed the cry of your soul today, click the like button. Let that simple gesture be your silent seed of faith, a sign between you and God that you chose trust over fear. God sees the surrender that no one else sees. He honors the hearts that say yes, even when everything inside them begs for reasons. Stay in this place of quiet faith a little longer, because sometimes the silence is not the absence of God. It is His gentle hand turning the soil of your heart for something new to grow. And in the next teaching, we will step into an even deeper truth: how to walk when God changes the route without warning, how to trust when the plan you had falls apart, but the promises remain, how to recognize that sometimes the greatest blessings come wrapped in the unexpected, because faith does not always need explanations. Sometimes it only needs to recognize presence and to rest there completely. Teaching 10, Hebrews chapter 10, verse 23. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. The road stretches ahead, but the wind resists with every step. You lean forward, not because the way is smooth, but because there is no other choice but forward. Each step feels like a decision to keep moving, even when everything in you wants to pause, to hide, to turn back. It's a road where visibility is limited. You don't see miles ahead. You don't see the ending glow on the horizon. You see just enough for the next step, and sometimes that has to be enough. Your hands grip the steering wheel of faith, even when the storm beats against your resolve. Your heart trembles at times, yes, but your steps are steady. This is the beauty of faith, not built on emotions, but anchored in truth. It is here, in this place of silent perseverance and quiet courage, that today's word becomes not just encouragement, but command. Let us hold unswervingly to the hope we profess, for he who promised is faithful. Hold unswervingly, without bending under the pressure, without retreating under the silence, without letting go when nothing seems to confirm what you believe. This was written to a people who were facing loss, opposition, loneliness, early believers who stood to lose everything: reputation, safety, family, because of their faith. And yet, the instruction was not to wait for easier days to have stronger faith. It was to hold fast now, in the tension, in the darkness, in the silence. The call to constancy is not glamorous. It will not always be celebrated. Sometimes it will be misunderstood. Sometimes it will look like foolishness to those who measure progress only by visible victories. But God sees differently. Constancy in the unseen is one of heaven's most precious victories. To stay, to believe, to keep planting even when no sprouts are visible, to keep the candle burning even when no one notices its light. Because it is not about applause, it is about allegiance to a king whose promises are truer than the circumstances we walk through. Maybe you have been waiting for answers that have not yet come. Maybe you have stood for things that others have mocked. Maybe you have prayed prayers so long that they now rise like breath itself, wordless but full of weight. And maybe today you needed to hear again: you are not losing because you have not yet seen the outcome. You are winning every time you choose to stay planted in hope, even when sight fails. Faith is not the absence of struggle, it is the presence of steadfastness. Like a tree growing in secret strength beneath the earth, roots deepening, unseen by the world, but preparing for a future that storms cannot break. Like a candle that refuses to be snuffed out, no matter how fierce the winds blow. Like a pilgrim who walks step after uncertain step, trusting that beyond the bend, though unseen, a promise awaits. You may not feel strong today. You may not feel inspired. You may not feel capable. But none of these feelings disqualify your faith. Faith is not measured by emotions. It is measured by perseverance. The ground may tremble. The skies may darken. The heart may ache. But hope, real hope, does not waver when built on the faithfulness of the one who spoke galaxies into existence. He who promised is faithful, not was faithful, not might be faithful if conditions improve. Faithful, now, forever, unchanging. So as you walk forward, one step at a time, remember, your faithfulness in little things matters. Your perseverance when no one claps matters. Your decision to stay true when easier paths call matters, and heaven sees it all. If this word is strengthening your spirit today, if you feel the resolve rising quietly inside you, I invite you to make a public act of faith, not for attention but for alignment. Write in the comments, "I will hold on to hope because God is faithful." And let this be your declaration, not just for today, but for the days ahead when the path narrows and the winds howl, because hope held tightly is never wasted. It becomes the seedbed for miracles. Your perseverance is a sermon heaven treasures. Stay steady, stay faithful, stay planted in the soil of promises that cannot fail, because sometimes real strength is quiet. Sometimes the loudest declaration of trust is made with silent, steady steps forward. And in the next teaching, we will walk even deeper into this truth, exploring how to recognize and follow God's new directions when He shifts your path, even without warning, and how to move in faith, even when the map you had no longer fits the journey ahead. Because in His hands, every change, even the unexpected ones, are still part of the story He is faithfully writing for your life. And the story is not over yet. Teaching 11, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. But He said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me." There is a particular kind of silence that fills the room just before the rain, a stillness that feels heavy, almost sacred. And then, quietly, the first drops begin to fall, touching the ground not with force but with tenderness, like hands smoothing the wrinkles of an old, worn-out soul. Sometimes grace comes like that. Not announced by trumpets, not visible in fireworks or grand rescues, but arriving softly, almost invisibly, when the soul has no more strength left to search for it. After days of clouds, a single ray of light slipping through the window can feel like a visitation. After long nights of sighs too deep for words, a gentle warmth at the center of the chest feels like a promise. The heart grows tired, not always from rebellion, but simply from the weariness of carrying dreams, losses, hopes and fears that no longer fit neatly into the prayers we once knew how to pray. There are seasons when you do not ask for answers anymore. You simply hope, quietly, desperately, for enough strength to get through another day. And it is there, precisely there, that grace appears. It does not scold, it does not shout, it does not demand that you be stronger, better, braver. It wraps around you like a quiet presence. It steadies hands that tremble. It fills lungs that forgot how to breathe deeply. It lifts a heart that moments before was sinking under invisible weights. "My grace is sufficient for you," He whispers. Not, "will be sufficient if you believe harder." Not, "will become sufficient once you prove yourself worthy." Sufficient now. Sufficient already. Enough, even here. Enough, even tired. Enough, even broken. When Paul wrote these words, he wasn't sitting on a mountaintop in spiritual ecstasy. He was pleading, wrestling, worn, asking God to take away a thorn in his flesh, something so painful that he begged for its removal multiple times. And yet the answer he received was not the removal of pain. It was the infusion of grace. Grace not to erase the weakness, grace to live beautifully within it. Maybe you know what that feels like, to pray for escape and instead be given endurance, to ask for open doors and be given the courage to sit by closed ones, to hope for miracles and find instead the steady miracle of still standing. It happens quietly, in moments so small they could almost be missed, in the strength to get out of bed one more morning, in the peace that somehow appears at the kitchen sink, washing dishes with a mind heavy from waiting, in the unexpected comfort while standing alone in a crowd, like breathing deeply after a long cry, like a blanket pulling gently over a cold heart, like walking forward even when every step echoes with the sound of a heart still healing. This is the grace that sustains, not because you did everything right, not because you figured it all out, but because you are loved, sufficient, complete, covering every place you feel too exposed, too vulnerable, too not enough. It's not the absence of brokenness that reveals His power. It's the place where your brokenness meets His completeness, where your empty hands receive fullness, where your tired feet are strengthened for the next step, where your silent cries are met not with answers, but with arms that never let go. Right now, wherever you are, however you are, pause with me, Breathe deeply. Feel the quiet steadying of his unseen hands, and when you are ready, say out loud, "The grace of God sustains me." Let it be your whisper of truth today. Let it rise not from your strength, but from the very place where you have no strength left to give. Because that's where his glory lives, that's where his power rests, that's where real life begins. No more striving, no more needing to prove you're okay, no more pretending strength when your heart longs simply to be held. You are already sustained, you are already kept, you are already loved through and through. Even when you falter, his hands do not. Even when you doubt, his hold does not slip. And if your soul finds even a small resting place in this truth today, click the like button, not as an act of performance, but as a seed of faith planted silently in the soil of trust. God sees, God knows, God cherishes the surrender no one else sees. Rest here a little longer, in the sufficiency of a grace that asks for nothing and gives everything. Because the same God who spoke light into darkness, who raised hope from tombs, who called dead dreams back to life, is the God who now, even now, whispers your name, not with demands, but with delight. And in the next teaching, we will step deeper still into the mysteries of when God answers not by removing the battle, but by making you stronger within it. Because some victories are not in being delivered from the fire, but in discovering that the fire cannot consume what his grace sustains. Teaching 12, Isaiah, chapter 40, verse 31. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. The body is present, but the mind drifts far away. The eyes are open, but the light in them flickers, faint. Outside, the world continues, cars rushing by, voices rising and falling, life pressing forward at its relentless pace. But inside, everything is quieter, dense, heavy. There are days when the prayers feel like echoes, when the words of faith come out of your mouth, but your heart struggles to catch up. When you sit still, not because you are at peace, but because you no longer know what else to do. It's not a crisis of belief. It's a slow erosion of strength, a tiredness that goes beyond the body, a longing, not for explanations or miracles, but simply for peace. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you are there now, after praying and believing, after standing when you wanted to collapse, after carrying hope like a fragile flame through winds too strong to bear. And somehow you're still holding on, but the grip has loosened. Not because you stopped loving God, but because you are simply tired. And into this quiet exhaustion, into this unseen battlefield of the heart, the word speaks not with a shout, but with a whisper steady enough to rebuild the soul. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. It is not the strong who are promised new strength. It is the weary. It is the ones who wait, not the ones who always feel victorious. Hope is not passive here. It is an act of resistance. It is the decision to stay, even when nothing outside seems to change. Like a candle at the very end of the wick, flickering, fragile, but still burning. Like a breath drawn deeply after a day heavy with invisible battles. Like a soul who, sitting quietly by the side of the road, finds that Jesus is already there, sitting too. Maybe you thought you had to fight harder. Maybe you believed that renewal would come only when you could prove yourself worthy. Maybe you feared that resting would be failure, but God's promise is different. It is not a command to run faster. It is not a demand to believe harder. It is an invitation. Hope in me, and I will renew you. The road ahead may still stretch long and uncertain. The answers you seek may not appear today. The prayers you whispered in the dark may still hang in the silent sky. But you are not forgotten. You are not invisible. You are not too late. The God who numbers the stars also counts your tears. The God who commands the oceans holds your exhausted heart. You do not need to soar today. It is enough to hope. You do not need to sprint. It is enough to stand. You do not need to have all the answers. It is enough to be held. Maybe today your strength is not about flying. Maybe today real strength looks like simply breathing, sitting, resting, trusting that the wind that once seemed to knock you down will, in time, lift you. The promise is not in your performance. The promise is in His presence. He is the strength you don't have. He is the hope you forgot how to hold. He is the light that does not flicker, even when yours feels almost out. Stay here for a moment. Let the presence of God settle around you like quiet rain after a long drought. And when you are ready, say out loud, "My hope is in you, Lord. Renew my strength." Let it be a prayer, not from effort, but from need. Not from duty, but from the ache to trust again. Because hope is not the denial of pain. It is the refusal to let pain have the final word. It is the silent, stubborn song of a heart that, even broken, knows the way home. If you feel that your heart was touched by this moment, I invite you to join us in a gesture of silent communion. Wherever you are, quietly place your hand over your heart for a few seconds. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and just be here, alive, held. You are not walking this road alone. And as we continue this journey together, remember, sometimes the greatest victories are not the ones we shout about. They are the ones whispered in the darkness, sustained by unseen hands, watered by invisible streams of grace. In the next teaching, we will walk deeper into the mystery of God's faithfulness, how He weaves unseen answers into the very fabric of your waiting, your hoping, your persevering. Because the God who promises strength does not fail to deliver it, even if it comes softly, like the morning light slipping quietly through the cracks of a long night. The night is almost over, and hope, even now, is breathing new life into your soul. Teaching 13, Romans chapter 8, verse 16. The Spirit Himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Have you ever heard over and over again that God loves you and still felt like He was distant? Have you ever bowed your head in prayer, knowing in your mind that you are His child, but your heart prayed like a stranger, like someone hoping, not certain to be heard? How many times have you listened to songs about the love of God, only to feel like those promises were real for others, but somehow just out of reach for you? There is a deep and silent ache that many carry, a longing to belong, to not just know about God's love, but to feel it anchor every part of who we are. It's the ache of belonging in theory, but not always in experience, of walking the path of faith, saying all the right things, and still feeling like a distant observer instead of a beloved child. It's like standing inside a house where the feast is happening, and somehow remaining on the edge of the celebration. The emptiness isn't because you don't believe. It's because somewhere along the journey, the heart got tired of reaching for what it feared might not be real, at least not for you. And yet, today, a truth stronger than your doubts rises. A truth that does not depend on how deeply you feel it, how loudly you believe it, or how perfectly you walk it out. The Spirit Himself testifies with our spirit that we are God's children. Not we hope to be, not we might be if we do enough. We are. Your name is not written in sand, easily erased by the waves of fear, failure, or doubt. Your name is written in stone, eternal, unshakable, carved into the very heart of God. You are not a guest in the house of faith. You are family. You are not a worker earning wages. You are an heir, receiving an inheritance sealed not by your performance, but by your adoption through Christ. God's Spirit inside you does not whisper doubt. He shouts identity. You are son. You are daughter. You are His. Nothing. Not silence, not fear, not the days you feel empty, not the moments you fail, can unwrite what God Himself has declared over your life. When Paul wrote this to the Romans, he wasn't speaking to people who lived without struggle. He wasn't speaking to a church filled with unshakable faith. He was speaking to a family of believers, many of whom faced persecution, isolation, internal battles. Yet he reminded them, your identity does not wobble with your circumstances. You are children of God, not because you feel it today, not because you prayed the perfect prayer yesterday, but because he chose you, because his Spirit lives in you, because your belonging is rooted in his heart, not in your performance. It is like a child who falls, scrapes their knees, and runs, crying back into their father's arms. The fall does not negate the relationship. The dirt on their clothes does not revoke their place in the family. You are not loved because you are clean. You are loved because you are his, even when you pray timidly, even when you worship distractedly, even when you doubt silently, you are still his. And his love does not shrink to match your feelings. His love remains towering, constant, faithful. Today, let these words settle deeper than your mind, into your spirit. Let them push out the lies that say you must earn your place. Let them silence the voice that says you are barely tolerated. Let them echo louder than your fear. You are a beloved child of God, like a name engraved not on paper but on stone, like an inheritance sealed not by merit but by divine decree, like a heart once wandering, now firmly placed in a home that will never turn you away. And if today your heart, even a small trembling part of it, recognizes this truth, I invite you to declare it, not just silently, but openly. Write in the comments, I am a beloved child of God, simple, true, eternal. This small act of writing it down is not about being seen by others. It's about your soul agreeing again with heaven's declaration over your life. It's about aligning your spirit with the voice that has always called you mine. And if you desire to continue walking this journey, not alone, but as part of a family of faith that remembers and reaffirms this truth, sign up. Here, we are not perfect followers. We are beloved children walking home together. We are sons and daughters who sometimes stumble, sometimes sit down by the road, sometimes forget, but always belong. And no distance, no failure, no silence can change what he already wrote over you. Stay in this truth. Let it hold you longer than your doubts can. And as we move forward, in the next teaching, we will explore how to walk as a child, not striving for approval, but living from belonging. Because when you know you are loved, everything changes. And the journey truly begins. Teaching 14, Proverbs chapter 16, verse 9. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. It is time to lift your eyes, even when the path ahead still seems hidden. It is time to remember you do not need to understand everything today. You only need to trust the one who already sees the end from the beginning. Even without visible answers, you can make a decision now. Stay, believe. Move forward, even if only in your heart. There is a sacred courage that comes not from clarity, but from conviction. The conviction that even when everything around you feels uncertain, God remains certain. That even when your plans shatter, his purposes stand. That even when your hands are empty, his hands are still shaping your life. Today is a call, not to emotion, but to position. To stand where faith says, I trust, because he is still leading. I walk, because he is still establishing my steps. And in their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord, he establishes the steps. This verse is not a dismissal of planning. It is a reminder that beyond our dreams, hopes, and fears, there is a higher hand at work, a sovereignty that is never late, a goodness that does not falter. You may have planned paths that never opened. You may have mapped dreams that seem now like distant shores you will never reach. You may have walked through seasons where every door closed and every sign seemed to disappear. And yet, none of it was wasted. None of it was random. The delays were not denials. They were redirections. The closed doors were not rejections. They were protections. Because while you made your plans in sincerity, the Lord, with wisdom beyond what you can yet see, was establishing a better way, a safer path, a deeper preparation. a greater glory. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is to keep walking when you no longer understand the road, because you know the one who marks the steps. It's like walking through a fog thick enough to swallow sight, and yet knowing, deep in your spirit, that the path is still there. Because He is still there. Think of it. Every delayed answer, every silent prayer, every dream that had to be surrendered, all of it is held in the sovereign hands of the Father. Nothing slipped through His fingers, nothing escaped His plan, nothing surprised His heart. He is still working, still weaving, still shaping. The tapestry He is creating with your life is far more intricate, far more beautiful, far more eternal than the plans you had to lay down. And the threads you thought were broken are being woven into something only heaven could design. Maybe you're walking a road that doesn't look like anything you expected. Maybe you're standing in a season that feels barren and unfinished. Maybe your prayers seem like seeds planted in rocky soil. But hear this today. God is not improvising with your life. He is orchestrating every note, even the silent ones, even the ones you don't understand yet. He is conducting the symphony you cannot yet hear in full. And when the time is right, when the preparation is complete, when your spirit is ready, you will see that every step was ordered, every delay was mercy, every detour was grace. Lift your head, set your heart steady again. You have not been abandoned mid-journey. You are being led by hands that do not tremble, by a heart that does not change. The Lord establishes your steps, not the economy, not your past mistakes, not the size of your faith today, the Lord, and His establishment is sure. So breathe. Release the weight of trying to force understanding. Let go of the fear that you missed something, that you failed in some unseen way. You are still in His story. Still in His hands, still under His eye. Nothing is wasted, nothing is lost. Every small act of faith you made in the unseen places, every silent prayer, every decision to trust instead of panic, every moment you chose hope over despair, was a step He established. You are further than you think. You are closer than it seems. You are more held than you can imagine. God is leading, even in silence. Delays are preparation. Purpose is being woven where you cannot yet see it. Nothing is outside of divine sovereignty. Even when the map you held in your hands no longer makes sense, the shepherd still knows the way. And you, beloved, are following a path paved by His promises, not your understanding. Walk today with the quiet confidence of one who knows the path is established. The story is alive, the end is already seen, and it is good, because the one who began this work in you will be faithful to complete it. Hold your heart steady, lift your spirit higher. The steps you are taking, even the trembling ones, are leading you deeper into the destiny written by the hand of the Father, and the journey, though hidden now, will one day make perfect, radiant sense. In the next teaching, we will go even further into how to trust God's timing when the waiting stretches longer than you ever imagined, and how to hold on to faith when answers still seem just beyond the horizon. Because the steps are established, but the waiting is where strength is born, and you, beloved, are walking into something beautiful. Teaching 15, Psalm 37, verse 5. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in Him, and He will do this. There are moments when the road does not end, but the soul knows it's time to slow down. Moments when the horizon begins to stretch wider after a long, silent night. Moments when the wind rises quietly over the empty path, not to push you back, but to remind you that you have made it this far, and now you are ready to see beyond. It's not the end. It's a sacred pause. A place where the feet, worn and faithful, finally stop. Not to give up, but to hear what heaven is still whispering. After the battles, after the waiting, after the silence that pressed against your ribs and made your prayers fragile, now comes the stillness. The kind of trust that no longer needs signs to believe. The kind of faith that breathes, even when sight is still scarce. This is where we find today's word, not as a consolation, but as a call. Commit your way to the Lord, trust in Him, and He will do this. It is not an offer for the strong. It is not a challenge to the victorious. It is a gentle, firm invitation to the tired traveler, to the quiet soul who has discovered that strength was never the point. Trust was. Give it over. Lay it down, not out of fear, not out of resignation, but out of deep, vibrant surrender. Commit your way, not your performance, not your fears, not your need to control every outcome. Commit the journey itself, the twists, the hills you didn't expect, the valleys you didn't plan, the prayers you didn't know you would have to pray. Commit the questions you still don't have answers for. Commit the promises that feel too big for your hands. Commit the wounds that only His hands can heal. Trust, not because you see, not because you feel, but because He is who He says He is, and He will do it. He will complete the work He began. He will unfold the plan hidden in the waiting. He will water the seeds sown in tears. He will shine light on paths you thought were forgotten. Today is not the finish line. It is the opening of a greater walk. A walk no longer driven by sight, but sustained by presence. You are not walking empty, you are walking filled, with promises carried by a God who never writes in sand, but carves His faithfulness into eternity. Maybe your faith was reignited in the quiet hours when no one saw. Maybe your wounds began to heal where the world only saw stillness. Maybe promises you had forgotten how to hope for began breathing again, deep inside your spirit. This journey was never about building towers for the world to admire. It was about digging wells deep enough to reach the living water. It was about learning that grace doesn't always shout. It often whispers. That presence isn't measured by noise, but by the sustenance you didn't know you had until you realized you hadn't fallen. You discovered, or maybe rediscovered, that being a child of God is not about how much you feel. It is about where you belong, about who holds you, even in the silence. You learned that some promises only bloom after full surrender, that some victories only come when the soul finally releases its desperate grip on understanding and falls into trust. And if you made it here, step by step, day by day, it's because something was planted deep within you, and seeds planted by God never return void. Now it's with you. The next steps, the next prayers, the next quiet victories. Keep walking, even when there are no visible trails. Keep breathing faith, even when the air feels thin. Keep trusting, even when the map folds into silence. Because God is still writing, and the next line of your story, it's already prepared. You are standing on a bridge built by faith, sustained by grace, illuminated by truth, like silent footsteps on an invisible road, guided by eternal hands, like a heart learning that surrender is not giving up, it is being lifted higher. If these words, these moments, these whispers of heaven have met you along the way, then know this: nothing was wasted. Not the tears, not the questions, not the delays. Everything, absolutely everything, has been woven into a future full of life, full of God. The mountaintop is not the final destination. It is the place where you see further and walk deeper. The silence that once frightened you has become the soil where trust grows. The waiting that once broke you has become the altar where worship rises. And the love you once struggled to believe is now the air you breathe. The video ends here. But what God started in you continues. Walk slowly, walk confidently, walk with peace, because you are not stepping into the unknown. You are stepping into a story that was written long before you could see it. And heaven walks with you. Until we meet again, stay in faith, stay in hope, stay in Him. The best is not behind you. The best is still unfolding, step by silent, sovereign step.